So Nintendo just had a whole Nintendo Direct 6 days before another Nintendo Direct. That one focused on Switch 2 stuff, not even 5 days out from the full course meal when this goes up. But this Direct we just had was the appetizer. Switch 1 focused, still more software coming for it well into 2026. 9 years of this constant software stream. Say whatever you will about the quality of the appetizer, but it was a substantial enough holdover until the big event. And amidst one of the announcements was virtual cards. Basically, it's Nintendo's take on digital game sharing. This idea that they want the flexibility of physical game cards to extend over to digital games. If you purchase a game digitally, you can load it onto a Switch as a virtual game card. You can load and eject said virtual cards in and out of a Switch. When you eject a card, you can load it onto another Switch as if it were a physical card. You can arrange and organize virtual cards across 2 systems. You'd only need to link up locally to the second Switch once. You'd be able to access these games through virtual cards and on other systems and using other accounts without an internet connection. I would say it's a pretty neat little thing overall. It sparked a bit of a controversial debate related to the whole digital versus physical ownership debacle, but Nintendo basically is making accessing their digital games across multiple systems and accounts easier. You know Nintendo loves expanding their accessibility threshold, so I see this all around as a big positive. But on Nintendo's website, on a page talking about virtual cards, is this very interesting fine print at the bottom. The feature will come in an update in late April of 2025, a couple weeks after the Direct. The first time you have the game loaded on your system, and whenever the loaded title is ejected, you need an internet connection. But the key thing is the centerpiece. Nintendo Switch 2 exclusive games and Nintendo Switch 2 edition games can only be loaded on a Nintendo Switch 2 system. Switch 2 edition games. Edition games, you see where the interesting part is, but this isn't where it started either. For a while, since the Switch 2 rumors were floating around, when hardware specs and the strength of the console was being speculated, rumors and sources often talked about how people testing it used Breath of the Wild as the game they used for tests, and those tests showed it had Breath of the Wild running at a higher frame rate and resolution than normal, which it's normally 900p 30 frames per second. What's more is there are a lot of Switch titles harboring files within each game, showing many of them to be able to run at 4K resolutions, having hidden frame rate buffs, frame rate modes, etc. The remake for Paper Mario The Thousand Year Door, for example, has a hidden 4K resolution file. Xenoblade Chronicles X Definitive Edition is hiding a 60 frames per second mode as well in its files. But also the Switch 2 itself was heavily rumored to be using DLSS technology, which, correct me if I'm wrong in the comments, DLSS or Deep Learning Super Sampling is AI upscaling technology NVIDIA made exclusive to their graphics cards that helps make games look sharper and run smoother. It's a tool that helps improve graphical and performance capabilities while using less hardware power than if they directly use the hardware itself to process the immense number of pixels, textures, and such. AI is a very touchy subject in a lot of parts, rightfully so, but this is basically one of those few areas where it is being used efficiently and for overall nothing but good. It allows even weaker hardware to be able to output visuals at higher fidelities without costing as much to produce that high fidelity straight from the source. So this idea isn't unfounded as a whole, but Nintendo, before they could even elaborate this Wednesday, soft confirmed pretty much that, yeah, we're gonna get enhanced versions of Switch games on Switch 2 in some way, shape, or form. Nintendo is clearly alluding to some form of cross-gen upgrades for Switch 1 games. That pretty much is the only reasonable definition for what a Switch 2 edition game could possibly mean, at least at this moment in time. And Switch 2, with the help of DLSS, may even be able to handle 4K resolutions, which is really cool to think about. But the question always was, what form was this type of cross-gen upgrading going to take? Now, what always made this conversation stick was when Nintendo confirmed both Nintendo accounts from Switch 1 could transfer over to Switch 2, and when Switch 2 was confirmed to be backwards compatible. Obviously that means Switch 1 software will always be accessible the next system. Everyone wanted that just for that all on its own, to be able to play these older games into newer generations. But the idea of these older games getting upgraded versions, or just stronger visuals, better performance, better loading, etc., was also requested by millions of people, just hard to realistically picture in a way that made sense from Nintendo. In my opinion, I don't think Nintendo's going to go about this in a traditional sense. Sony and Microsoft often tend to release cross-gen versions of multiple games. Microsoft, with their first parties, they charge a flat fee, they ask if you're downloading the Xbox One version or the Series X version, and that's it. Sony will charge an extra $10 for the PS5 version as opposed to the PS4 version, as the PS5 version has stronger graphics, resolution, frame rate, all that good stuff. And all of this is pretty much between cross-gen titles or just straight remasters. I find it really hard to imagine Nintendo would just straight up make another purchasable version of, for example, Zelda Breath of the Wild for full price, and the only upgrades are, let's say it's 1080p, 60 FPS now. Pretty much. Because Nintendo's marked Breath of the Wild for full price, the entirety of it, and the Switch's life. Yeah, $70 is the new full price now. Tears of the Kingdom is the only $70 Switch game I know, but Nintendo never bog down their price. Unless it's for like a holiday or a special event like Mario Day, and even then the discount, it's not big at all. Nintendo always views their games as these premium titles, regardless of how old they are in the Switch era. The vast majority of them have always remained $60, just from a value perspective. I'm trying to picture a scenario where consumers can be reasonably eager and willing to pay for an enhanced version of Breath of the Wild, effectively a Breath of the Wild remaster at either $60 or $70 on a new system that'll cost slightly more than its previous system, when the weaker version of Breath of the Wild is still $60 with not a lot of downsides comparatively. You know what I mean? Assuming Nintendo's going to have a good number of Switch 1 software get enhanced versions on Switch 2, that kind of screams a substantial blow to their goodwill from fans, and would just hiss anti-consumer to everyone in a way that really paints Nintendo in a greedier light on a wider scale. Yes, Nintendo's not shy to pulling some anti-consumer practices and strategies that put them at risk with their consumers and their goodwill and whatnot, but even for how normalized their competition makes the practice out to be, Nintendo's always, and still is, the cheaper, more affordable, more accessible option of the big three in the gaming space. And something like this, I could reasonably see bite them in the ass more if this is the route that they go down, biting the hand that feeds them. Because, dude, so many people really wanted backwards compatibility for Switch 2. Look at that. Switch 2 is backwards compatible. Hallelujah, let's go. Based super omega fat W. Awesome. You know damn well none of those people want to pay full price for the exact same game they bought on Switch 1 just for minor buffs that they would get on Switch 2. They got away with it for a lot of the Wii U ports that came over to Switch, because once again, not a lot of people bought the Wii U. Not a lot of people bought those Wii U games either. Most Wii U enhanced ports sales on Switch prove the vast majority of consumers in this install base are new consumers. Most of these ports also sport considerable, decent changes, if not outright new, substantial content too. Everyone's bought these Switch games always, and everyone wants backwards compatibility just to keep playing these games into newer generations. The idea of just packaging Switch 1 games but slapping Switch 2 edition on the box sounds really silly even for Nintendo, and the existence of backwards compatibility all on its own, I think, spits in the face of the idea of at least a handful, if not more, Switch 1 titles just getting the remaster treatment, packaged as premium upgraded versions for Switch 2. Buying the standalone upgrades, purchasable upgrades, I think it makes slightly more sense. I don't think it's going to happen either. At most, like a $5 to $10 upgrade in either buying and downloading the updates or something along those lines. It makes a little bit more sense. You basically structure it as if you were buying DLC at that point, but I don't see it as something that'll be universally received well by most still. We also don't know for sure as well how many games as a whole will be getting these upgrades, what types of upgrades to expect across the board, if some of these games that have these files for handling 4K, buffed frame rate, etc. might not even get these upgrades at all, etc. So it's definitely reasonable to think it could just be a very selective case-by-case basis of some titles actually being cross-gen. Metroid Prime 4 is still in the conversation to whether it's getting cross-gen releases. Now with this Switch 2 edition piece floating around, and still mystery surrounding it and an unknown concrete release date, some are speculating this means Nintendo will use Metroid Prime 4 as one of its only cross-gen titles, and the Switch 2 version will boast better performance, graphics, load times, and such. Or they'll extend it to other new titles we don't know about for both Switch 1 and 2 that will be cross-gen. At least as far as Metroid Prime 4 Beyond goes, and maybe a handful of other titles, I think that's definitely possible. It's more reasonable than the other two suggestions. My theory, the scenario I think is the best case scenario, but also, in my opinion at least, the likeliest scenario really is probably just free updates. Plenty of these alleged upgrades are buffs and enhancements, often patched into games already, but when you factor that on top of the fact Switch 2 is backwards compatible with Switch 1 games, and when Nintendo still continues to view their games since 2017 as premium experiences, still worth high to full value, I think Nintendo just simplifying Switch 2 edition games across free enhancement updates, specifically for Switch 2, would make the most sense. Switch 2 edition would effectively be just a label for the sake of clarity. Paper Mario: The Thousand Year Door, Switch 2 edition, with its performance and enhancements, can't be transferred to Switch 1 and have the benefits and buffs of the Switch 2 edition, more or less. If you have these games for Switch 1, you can still play them on Switch 2, but you have the option to download performance enhancement updates for free on Switch 2 and Switch 2 only. And that's how we get Breath of the Wild in 4K 60 FPS or whatever. It keeps the upgrades and enhancements worthwhile and incentivizing for consumers. It keeps the new console incentivizing and interesting for consumers. It gives us another reason to buy Switch 2 without jumping through a lot of hoops to do so. It still makes just the console itself the primary big buy, the only thing you gotta worry about. It doesn't overcomplicate things with separate remasters, standalone purchasable enhancements, a bevy of cross-gen titles like other companies do. It doesn't contradict Nintendo's approach to accessibility, their stance and status as the cheaper, more affordable option in the console gaming business. It benefits and supports their approach and status, as a matter of fact. Some will argue it's too optimistic or naive to expect Nintendo to be that pro-consumer, but I honestly feel like this is one of those modern gaming tactics Nintendo would unironically do. There would still be plenty of profit and benefit for Nintendo, with the least amount of pushback and controversy, if at all, from the consumers. Even then, I could very well be wrong. They could just do the remaster angle, the purchasable update angle, the cross-gen angle, like how they did with Zelda Twilight Princess for GameCube and Wii, and Breath of the Wild on Wii U and Switch. But I do think Nintendo's gonna go about it in their own way, slightly different from their competition, especially if they want to maintain the momentum and stride they've built from Switch 1. That's my 2 cents. What about your expectations and theories when it comes to Switch 2 edition games? Give me your thoughts in the comments. We'll find out in a matter of days. It's only going to be 5 days, which is very exciting. I am very curious nonetheless. Thank you for watching, and stay super.
哟，嘿，妹妹，嘿，我来呀！共和大哈哈呀！拉面，嘿，来面，海哥面，共和再见呀！哈哈，拉面，烫手面，谢谢。